Welcome to Psychology of Pilgrimage. In this episode, I am joined by Laura A. Macaluso, who is a cultural heritage scholar, writer, and public historian whose work explores the intersections of art, history, and community identity. Good morning, Laura. It's amazing to see you again and to have the opportunity to speak with you for a period of time about a chapter that you wrote for a book that I'm co-editing with Stefan Michonneau and Frank Viltar. Your chapter is called Three Rude Crosses, Reflections on the Jerome Family Pilgrimage to France, 1919. And I'd like to start by hearing about how you discovered this pilgrimage and about your background professionally, personally, artistically, however you would like to describe it, that led to you being interested in the pilgrimage and also presenting the information in the way that you have.
Okay, I'm so happy to be here and to see you, Heather. It was so amazing for me to find someone like you because, I'm kind of an independent scholar and I feel like I kind of work on the edges of things. And I have my, kind of passion projects and the things that I love to do. But finding other people who appreciate those same things, is kind of hit or miss. And we all have our, problems these days in terms of what social media is doing to us as people, as a society, as our culture. But that is how I discovered you and your work. And so there's so much value, in kind of keeping up as much as we can in smart ways, and getting our stuff out there so that people can find each other and, attend conferences together and do good work together, like put together collected essays. So again, thank you for having me. And it's always a pleasure to see you. So we do have lots of images, and hopefully it's okay with your viewers that I talk to images, because the fact is, I was trained in art history. That's kind of my core being, and it's how I see the world, even though, I perhaps don't do it in a formal sense or in the ivory tower in academia, but I do apply, I think, an art historical lens to most things that I still research and write about. Although my writing is taking a turn towards the creative, because even though I earned a PhD, I also then later earned an MFA in creative writing. And so that's, I want to make space for creative people and the arts, and how that those mediums can help bring the things that we're interested in to more people and open the archives, which is kind of what I'm about, right? I really love to spend time, as so many of you do, in museums, in libraries, and in archives. And I'm in the process of, moving back to Connecticut, where my archives are located. So I'm kind of excited for that I'm going to be getting to go back to some of these repositories and revisit some things, and continue to work more closely, because travel has become, it's a big deal. It's a big undertaking for folks. So I'm going to be happy to be close at hand to my stuff. So I am showing you my first slide, and this is how an art history person who knows nothing about making war, going to war, World War I, World War II. This is how it happened for me. And I hope it's not too ridiculous to tell this little story about me and New Haven, which is my geographic locale of interest. It, again, is where the archives are located that I often use. And I still continue to research and write about New Haven, even though I've lived in Virginia and Pennsylvania, for almost 15 years. But there's something about this place that is super special to me, and I think to a lot of people. It's not a top tier city, it doesn't have Chicago's vibes and New York's, and San Francisco's icons. It doesn't have any of that. But it has a really rich, unique history, I would argue. And so what you're seeing on the screen is actually my first taste of world wars through memorialization, right? And you're seeing on the left a monument to Corporal Timothy Ahern, which is on El Agrasso Boulevard in New Haven. And you all recognize World War I doughboy soldiers because they are all wearing basically the same uniforms and the same helmet that is lopsided. So it kind of, and even in the photograph that also you see on the slide, you can see New Haven soldiers standing on the green with their lopsided helmets because I think they didn't fit very well. So Timothy Ahern became, a hero for the city, someone they wanted to remember. And I think what we can trace pretty easily, certainly in Connecticut, but I think in many other states as well, that the 1920s, late 1920s, and certainly the first part of the 1930s was a very active era for remembering World War I. And at least in New Haven, we had WPA money to spend, and this is what they chose to spend it on. So this monument was created with WPA funds. And at the time, I was working in parks. I'm a not-for-profit kind of person, working in development kinds of projects. And we did a monuments inventory, a basic monuments inventory, and then a preservation project on Timothy Ahern. And that is kind of why you can see on the slide that the image that ended up being on the cover of my little World War I book, he looks much better. And it's because he had been taken care of by a professional conservator who addressed multiple monuments in New Haven. But for me, it all started with Timothy Ahern. And in fact, I ended up writing my dissertation about public art. So it really, in a way, it really does all start with Timothy Ahern. He had a hole in his boot. He doesn't have the hole anymore. And his surface was kind of was cleaned and then kind of reconsolidated with lacquer. So he's going back. So like all monuments, who knows what he looks like today? I'll have to find out when I get back to New Haven. So I developed this interest in monuments, 20 years before the world became reinterested in monuments, right? We're so used to talking about them and arguing about them and trying to figure out what to do with them or putting them back up. Right now, the NEH, the National Endowment for the Humanities, has a $600,000 grant available for American communities to apply if they want to create bronze monuments for Trump's Garden of Heroes. So the monuments controversy goes up and down in terms of it's on fire, people forget about it, it's on fire again, people forget about it. We're in one of those cycles, and we will see what comes out of these grant awards. There's so much to be said about that, but I did write my dissertation on monuments, memorials, and public art, and I did develop this interest in World War I because of what was around me in New Haven, a rich historic city filled with things, wall paintings, artwork on the sidewalk, sound art in garages, the whole thing. And Yale University is there, which also makes it, a really interesting experience to talk about the relationship between the city and its people. So at the same time, I'm doing, monuments work. I'm also thinking that the commemoration of World War I is coming around. And who am I, this art history person, who am I to write a New Haven in World War I book? But, that's the way to learn and is to do it. And so this was I think it was actually probably it was my third book, my second or third book. And I had to mine kind of the material culture of what was around me. And so I'm going to show you the second slide, which has some really interesting bits and pieces about World War I that I needed to learn about or kind of discover for myself because I really didn't know, and then tried to find the stories about these things and kind of what they mean, and then weave them together, right, into some themes. And so I don't know if anyone will recognize some of these things, but on the upper left is the fountain to Seicheprey in France, the 102nd Regiment from Connecticut. This is their gift back to the little town in France where they fought their big battle, if you will. And the fountain was actually just fixed a couple of years ago for the commemoration for the 100th anniversary. So that was really, I didn't know about that when I was younger. And I thought, this is so great. Connecticut and France, I needed to know more. The flagpole, base of the flagpole, which you see in the center image, you see the doughboy carved in relief and bas relief, again, from a WPA sculptor. So it dates from that time. It's still, the fountain around it still runs. The name of the battles are carved around the bottom, the octagon. And there are some, I think, names in the bronze plaques underneath. And it is the town greens flagpole. So it is where commemorations still happen today. And then some more odd bits and pieces because of Yale. You see a little doughboy head carved into one of Yale University's buildings, again from the 1930s, because Yale is rebuilding itself in the 1930s, creating colleges on the English higher education model. And they're using the same sculptors, artists, iron workers, kind of who can make their buildings look Gothic, make them look old in the center of basically New Haven. So he appears there, and some Parian ware, which is kind of a plaster of a French infantry soldier, and then a doughboy, which are in the collection of Yale, which are never out, but somehow I discovered them, and they ended up in my book. And then a most mysterious on the bottom left-hand corner, missing memorial to the dead, again by WPA folks. And all we have left is the record is this photograph. So that is kind of my background as to how this started. So should I tell you about the Jeromes and how that started?
I can't wait to hear about that. Is it okay if I also ask a couple questions about the photos?
Yes.
The fountain in Seicheprey I've actually been to. I thought it looked familiar. A couple of years ago, the town renamed one of the streets in honor of the Yankee division, and so the ceremony was at this fountain before the unveiling of the street sign. I also was wondering, are you familiar with the monument to the 42nd Division in France?
What does the monument look like?
It bears a very strong resemblance to the La Pieta. So it's a doughboy carrying a wounded or dead soldier in his arms. And there are some similarities visually between the doughboy statue that you first showed, Timothy A. Hearn. Is
Yep.
it Hearn? Is that
Yep.
right?
Ahern, yep.
And also the one on the left, the faces, the bottom left, with you said it was a monument to the missing or a monument to
To the dead,
dead?
I
To the
think.
dead. Yeah. And I'm actually just curious if there is some link between this sculpture. Let me see if I
Can
can
I?
actually show it on the screen or
Okay.
just show it to you here.
I also have the page in my book of it,
Okay. Yeah.
so I
So
can
this
share
is what
with you.
I don't know if you can oh, you can't see it on my phone because
Yeah,
yeah. Anyway, this is a curiosity for me. I think I'm gonna try and look into this now.
but Heather, your point about the Pietà and
Yeah.
Michelangelo, and
Yeah.
using marble, using white, the mother figure, absolutely, that would be a wonderful um, connection for all of these, because they can't be the only ones, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean they're very striking visually. This particular monument to the 42nd Division, it to me is it's just heart wrenching to see it, and so yeah, I can definitely see the link. This was a link that I thought of when I first saw this, and it seems like that there are echoes of the Pietà in all of these photos that or most of the photos that you showed.
Right. I mean, as soon as bring a woman into, an artwork, she only has so many limited roles to play. And that would be one of them. Or if this is an angel, but it
Mm-hmm.
takes on feminine form because she's wearing, kind of she's
Yes.
clothed, she's not nude like
Yes.
he is. But in that kind of 1930s style, she's pretty strong. Like, this is a strong woman because she's
Mm-hmm.
holding him up, really, because he has
Mm-hmm.
no strength, which is true of Mary. Michelangelo, created that sculpture. And if you look, Mary is twice the size of her dead son, right? Because she's
Mm-hmm.
got these huge legs that he's laying across. And he's such a master that you don't realize the woman is tremendous, which is not realistic,
Mm-hmm.
from a humanity kind of point, maybe. And this one too, really. And this fellow, his name is Salvatore Milici, so he's Italian. They're coming, these WPA, Italian American sculptors, a lot of them are rebuilding Yale. They are first generation Italians. So, they have the Renaissance in their blood. So the fact that they're doing this is not,
Mm-hmm.
makes complete sense.
Yeah, yeah. This one also bears a strong resemblance to Mother Canada at the Vimy Memorial. I don't know if you're familiar with this one. So also very strong, but in a mourning pose, and yeah, this sculpture is also very provocative for me.
It also, when you said that, and the word mourning, it just also reminded me that, the United States has, its own sculptural tradition, from the late Victorian, into the Gilded Age, which of course goes back to Europe, but it is American. And there's a famous sculpture of, I want to say it's in Massachusetts, and maybe we should get some of these pictures and put them up. It would just be interesting to
Mm-hmm.
compare them. And it's a funerary sculpture, and the woman is sitting by herself with this heavy drapery over her head, so you could almost not see her face. In this one, we can see her face and it's actually called the Guardsman Memorial. So it's for the
Okay,
National Guard.
the one in Massachusetts.
No, I'm sorry. I'm getting things. This one we're talking about for Salvatore Milici in New Haven.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. But it's making me think too then about how important clothing is, because we're going to be talking about
Yes.
clothing later
Yeah.
today, but Michelangelo's Pietà Mary also has a very heavy garment across, over her head.
Yes.
So these things are all related. And in fact, honestly, probably would be very easy to find ancient Greek and Roman examples of women who, dress like this. And it's just been updated for the needs of, the 20th century or the 19th
Yes.
century. So
Yeah, that makes sense.
they go back. Yeah.
I am looking forward to hearing about the Jerome family because I know that there are themes that actually tie into this brief conversation we've had around Victorian era clothing and mourning and how women are portrayed visually and artistically as well.
It's true. So on this next slide, what I'm just showing everyone is that when I put together this little New Haven and World War One book, again, I had to. I think it's kind of normal for me in the writing world. You are usually categorized as two things: you are a plotter or you are a pantser. Right? You fly by the seat of your pants, or you plot things out. I'm a pantser. And so I usually come up with an idea and then I'm like, oh, geez, I have to fill this idea with stuff, with the content. And usually I have a sense that there is stuff out there to call on, but still, you never know what you're going to get until you really start getting into it. And so I'm just showing you that some of the chapter contents for this book, and you'll see that I start the book with the Jerome family because in my work to kind of get this little book put together, I became enamored of their story, as so many people are. The fact is, I'm not the first by a long shot to offer the Jerome family story to the community. They have been the subject of a museum exhibit and now 2 museum exhibits. I wrote about a little bit about them for the World War I commemorative .org, the platform that is still alive and going. There have been articles written about Jerome, Gilbert Nelson Jerome, who is the aviator at the heart of the story. So the story has been around, but I think maybe focusing on the women and what they did on pilgrimage was a little bit of a different twist. And you'll also, I kind of, Heather, went back and I realized, oh, look at me, erroneous. I'm calling it a Gold Star pilgrimage. So I wrote this book probably in 2016, something like that. Did not really realize, did not put it together, right? They weren't on a Gold Star pilgrimage, right? They were on their own pilgrimage. But here I am using that terminology because everyone that's what you recognize. If you have heard about a pilgrimage for women in World War I, that's the pilgrimage you know about. So would I do that today? Probably not. But I did it, back then, and that's how it goes. So the thing that captured me and really is something that only now it kind of like has calmed down a bit, honestly, is the series of photographs, which you see on your screen, which kind of blew me away. Honestly, again, for an art history person, if you talk about monuments and you talk about paintings on a wall, sculpture in a museum, when you're confronted with historic images that that you don't know how to make sense of them, and something interesting is going on here, but you just can't figure it out. I mean, there's just, for me, it was the thing that I said, wait, I have to kind of understand this, because I was in shock that I looked at these black and white photos of a burial site. You can see it looks like a rubble pile. It's just a pile of stone. And there are men that look like Nazis in front of it. And there's a man with a cross. And it's Gilbert Nelson Jerome. It's this young New Haven man who is under that pile of rubble. And I just thought, what is going on here? And, of course, realizing at some point, hopefully quickly, that, okay, they're not Nazis, right? It's World War I, but they have the very similar profile, a very similar stance, how rigid they are and how professional they are. And of course, the helmet is very similar to what they wore in World War II. I don't know the history of helmets. I'm thinking it probably didn't change all that much. So I was kind of questioning all that and questioning the role of the French cure in this photograph, and then did the reading and went to the archives and found out, what the backstory is about how this New Haven man ended up, under that pile of rubble in France in July of 1918. And the story is, of course, that he's super interesting. And I'm showing the next slide because his family is super interesting. And they are the Jeromes. But they weren't for a little while. For a little while, they were the Lees. So the story of this New Haven family goes something like this. Yan Fao Li is a Chinese immigrant student who comes to the United States in the 1880s as a young man, 12 years old, 13 years old. He comes with a group of other young Chinese students who are supported by their monarch to come and get an American education, which the Chinese monarch believes they will bring back and help modernize their country to partake more fully in the Industrial Revolution. And Yan Fao Li comes and is assigned a family in Springfield, Massachusetts. And he gets going to school, and the young men have all studied English for years to prepare. They're assigned a family. They then learn colloquial English. They are put into the public school system. They make friends. They join baseball teams. And then they get ready to go to college. And some of them are just so darn smart. Yan Fao Li is a great example of that they go to the best colleges, right? They go to Yale. They go to Harvard. And Yan Fao Li is there for only a short time when his government decides they don't like the reports they're hearing about young Chinese men becoming too Americanized. They've cut their queues, the long ponytails, they're wearing Western clothing. They are probably showing interest in things that young men do, playing too many sports, looking at too many women, things like that. And they are pulled back, all of them. They're ordered back to China. And Yan Fao Li is devastated because he is a fantastic scholar and he is friends in New Haven and friends at Yale. He goes back for a year. He hates it. He can't figure out what to do with himself. He decides to defy his government and he leaves China again for New Haven. He comes back to Yale to finish his career, and he has no money. And so he has to go on lecture tours. He starts lecturing about basically what life is like in China. That's his thing, right? He can talk about what he knows best. And American audiences who need entertainment and education at the Lyceum, at your town's Lyceum, go to hear him on his New England tours. And so he gets through Yale and he graduates top of the class. He's not number one, number two, but he's top 10, basically. And he's asked to speak at the graduation ceremony, which happens on the New Haven Green, because everything important happens on the New Haven Green. His last year at Yale, he also meets and falls in love with Elizabeth Maud Jerome, a New Havener, many generations back. And right after graduation, basically, they get married. And then 9 months after that, their first child is born, Elizabeth Maud Jerome. And the year after that, Gilbert Jerome is born. And then their marriage falls apart, and they get divorced. And Elizabeth Maud Jerome renames herself with her maiden name and renames her children with the Jerome family last name. And he is gone basically forever from their lives. And he has a very difficult, peripatetic life going back and forth between China and America for the rest of his life. And eventually he disappears in China in the 1930s. And it's surmised that he's a victim of the Japanese-Chinese War, and that his body is forever kind of buried somewhere, destroyed. So we've got the family photograph that you see, but you can see very clearly it's divided because there's no family photograph of Yan Fao with his children. And I think it's just interesting to think about what it was like. And I'm bringing up the next slide. What it's like to be half Chinese in New England, a traditional Puritan heritage, heavy Christian city, right? New Haven is a city that was created out of the 9 square plan, right? The center squares are town green, but the 9 squares represent Jerusalem. And it was literally carved into the earth in 1639 by the Puritan colonists. So it's like a part of identity. And the Jeromes are very much part of that because they rest heavily. They kind of push the Chinese heritage as far away as it can be. And they talk only about their New England and English history, even though they certainly look, half Chinese. And Jenny has this, kind of beautiful long hair. So these are photographs of Gilbert and Jenny growing up together. They end up growing up in a very nice, genteel kind of way because Elizabeth Maud Jerome, their mother's mother, has a lot of money, and she dies and she gives it to them, and they take it and they build a house for themselves, which you can see in the lower right-hand corner. The house still survives. It was built in 1913, I think. And it's just this, really very nice turn of the century, very stable kind of neo-colonial place for these two people who maybe don't feel always a part of everything because they look different from the folks that they were associated with, because they did go to both public school and to private school. And certainly it's a turn of the century. There's plenty of Chinese and Asian people in New Haven, right? But they're not living in the leafy green suburb here. This house was called Greenway, on the west side of town, this kind of new expansive side of town. So they are really best friends, these two, Elizabeth and Gilbert, the brother and sister. And I love to see the brother, Gilbert, in his Boy Scout uniform, because that becomes his identity. And I love to see Jenny sitting at her desk at the library because she becomes the art librarian eventually for the city of New Haven, which becomes her identity, right? And eventually, Gilbert, as we see in this next slide, he's going to take his Boy Scout, his comfort and his joy in being a Boy Scout, because he just loved it. He loved it so much. He became the first kind of what is so-called paid administrator. So he was kind of the office manager, the Boy Scout manager for the first office of the Boy Scouts in New Haven, right? And it's early again because the Boy Scouts have just been formed, I think, I want to say like 1910 in England, and it's an import. and Americans take to it very, very quickly, and it spreads across the country. But here's a great example of it appearing in New Haven. So you see Gilbert in his very quick transformation from Boy Scout to entering World War I, becoming a cadet in what was before the Air Force, the U.S. Army Air Signal Corps, and then eventually earning his lieutenancy, if that's a word. And he earns it, a very short amount of time before he's killed in the air in France. So let me just say and here, just to end on that note, before we do the women and their pilgrimage, here is a watercolor of Gilbert's biplane, right? He becomes an aviator. He loves to fly. He's pretty reckless from his diaries. He's just a young, strong, intelligent man, but with kind of this side to him that's a little bit right. He loves to speed. He talks about speeding around France on his motorcycle, like, the chickens are flying everywhere, and the French villages are yelling at him, and he just thinks it's a hoot and has a really a good time. He's not, and he talks about this a little bit in his diary. He knows he has it good. He's not an infantry soldier. He's not a doughboy. He's not on the ground in the mud. These folks are, staying in old chateaus and having their meals cooked for them. He does come across Roosevelt. He comes across, a lot of the famous names of the aviator names. And that, as it turns out, is the reason why he's buried that way, and that the Germans come to pay homage to him, not because he's just, a doughboy, right? He's set apart as being something different and something special, even though he's no ace. He doesn't do anything at all. He doesn't even have time to do anything. He's killed, like 3 days into his, his first mission. I mean, but nevertheless, they come and do a French-German funeral service where both parties talk, say prayers and say something about him. And that's why the photographs were taken, strangely to me still, wow, by someone on the ground, and the photographs were given to the Berlin Red Cross, who gave the photographs then to the American Red Cross, and the photographs were sent to Greenway, to his mother and sister. So that's kind of that story.
When you were talking about the watercolor, I was looking at it, and thinking it does seem that this is a fusion of his Chinese and American heritage represented here. Is that on target? Is that what you see in this as well?
Oh gosh, Heather, I mean, that's amazing, really. Thinking of like that red sky, the red sun. Yeah. They never talk about it. Never. They write between the 3 family members, the mother, the daughter, and the son. They write constantly to each other, and they never talk about it. So I think you can say whatever really, in a way. We can ascribe it to something deeper. I am, writing eventually. I've gone to another project, but I'm going to come back to this project about them, and this creative writing project. And in my mind, I am doing something with flying in terms of, because his father, Yan Fao Li, he wrote the first book published by a Chinese American in the United States. And this first book is called When I Was a Boy in China. And it replays, all these scenes about his birth and his growing up as a boy. And there's a whole chapter about kite flying in that. And then Gilbert becomes a Boy Scout. And what do Boy Scouts love to do? they make kites. You know, that is like one of the things like in the guide to boys, you know, this is what you should do with your time. You know, you should learn how to make your own very elaborate kites, you know, and fly them around. So I'm going to be thinking about your comments when I get back to that and think about that watercolor.
It's also interesting that um, Gilbert's father leaves the family, and Gilbert then seeks out opportunities in the Boy Scouts, and as a pilot in the Army Air Corps. And then his final moments in terms of, well, he's not present anymore, but these German soldiers that are gathered around his grave, in some ways it's like the missing father is all around him all the time, even after death. That it strikes me as the symbolism there seems quite significant.
It's true. He is. I mean, I do kind of rely on this, you know, sensibility for him because he's the only male in that house, which, you know, in the early 20th century, you know, to not have like a male figure, how quickly does he become a male figure? Um, he does do a bit of, I wouldn't say he's not very heavy-handed, you know, but he does do sometimes in the letters home, make sure you do this, don't forget about this, to his sister. And it always, for me, has struck me that she's the older, but she is very short, she's very petite, and he's the younger, and he's very tall, right? And he's always kind of like, their personalities are very different. He's extremely outgoing. He's always smiling. He's got tons of friends. You know, the Boy Scouts are always going camping together, and she's always left at home, kind of by herself, without, you know, well, what she has to deal with then is her own mother and the ghosts, I think, of her mother. And I don't know that I've thought maybe enough about missing male figures for Jenny, the sister daughter.
And well, it seems also that the life then starts to orient around Gilbert, and his heroic feats and the activities that he's doing in the Boy Scouts, and then he becomes a pilot, and then the pilgrimage is also, I mean, this then the next decade also is oriented around this son and brother. And
It's true. It's
yeah,
true. It's really true. Like if they have, and I think about this maybe for us too. If you have something to do, like what is your role? What is your job? What are you doing? So a Boy Scout is always doing. That is the purpose, right? They're never sitting around like, you know, they don't really like sit around and recite poetry, right? They're active. And the mother, Elizabeth Maud Jerome, loves this for her son. She's like, go, you know, she couldn't control him, I think, anyway, because he really was kind of, I'm on my way, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. He had that ability or that potential, and they let him fulfill that potential. But she was not like that for her daughter, and that was a real point of contention. So as you point out really beautifully, it continues even though he's not there, because they have to do this pilgrimage, and then it continues after that because they have to do the memorial all over again, right? Because they bring his body home eventually, and then they need to decorate the church, and they're all doing it for him, you know. But it is that makes me think, what happens when it's all over? Because then it does end. Like you can't memorialize, like, you know, you can't make 20 stained glass windows. They made one. You know, you can't write 20 memorial books. They wrote one. Um, and then life has to go on. And Jenny has decades. The mother doesn't. but Jenny does. And what is the doing then? She has to replace the doing. And I also think maybe that's Victorian too. And maybe we're a little bit like the Victorians in that sense. Like you find your salvation through, don't have idle hands, right? Always be working, always be, which also reminds me of the lace making too, and how time consuming lace making is, which can bring us to the next part if you want to.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So the next slide that you all see have to do with documenting this pilgrimage that, as we said at the very beginning, is not a Gold Star Mother's pilgrimage. It's not the 1930s. It's 1919. And this is another thing that for me was very shocking to learn, or just, it just took me aback. I was like, the war just ended and they're going to what? Like, was that what people do? The war ends and you go in the middle of the mess. It's hard to imagine, and they don't spend a lot of time. So it makes me think that year between 1918, the gun silencing, and 1919, they go in September, that there just has been a tremendous amount of on the ground progress or on the ground work being done. Not to say that they didn't see blown out villages, etc., but that life, kind of had restarted, and that they inserted themselves into this new pattern of whatever was happening in France. So the story kind of is, and how we know anything about this pilgrimage are from the photographs taken, probably a lot of them by Jenny, but also Jenny kept a short diary. And it's a diary in the form of not a big desk diary, but one of those diaries that you would put in your pocket, like a pocket-sized diary. And she kept up with it. She didn't write daily, but she did write regularly from September to December 1919 till when they get right back to Greenway, because that is Jenny's agenda, right? Jenny goes on the pilgrimage not as a willing participant, but as a support mechanism for her mother. I'm sure she felt like she didn't have a chance. And the only reason we know that is because she writes, one or two long passages where she basically says, my mother is a pain, a royal pain. I can't stand it. I'm on the verge of crying every day, but I'm doing this because I have to do it. And she kind of gives herself some grace, and she says, people understand, what I'm going through. And even if they don't, I know what I'm going through, kind of thing. So she knows herself, I think, pretty well. And also probably I should be saying that they're a little bit older. Gilbert Nelson Jerome dies when he's 28. He's old for an aviator. He's old for infantry, or older for an aviator. He is a man that he's not 18. And Jenny's older, so she's already like in 30, 31 by the time they do pilgrimage. So they're not teenagers, they're adults, but they still are so tied to the mother. So there's that kind of thing. So I think what you'll find interesting to look at with these pilgrimage portraits, I actually don't know who took them. They're obviously not taken at the same time, but they are gathered in the same place, kind of in the material, in the archival material, and is their clothing. Because, on the one hand, you say, well, yeah, they're in mourning. We're used to people, even still today, even though traditions have kind of fallen away. Black is a traditional color for mourning, black ribbons, black armbands. Once in a while, you still see these things on the news. One of my neighbors here in South Central Pennsylvania, her husband died, and she put a huge black ribbon on their mailbox. And that's how, I knew. I don't know if anyone else knew or is paying attention, but I'm sure it was for that. So the pilgrimage photos, then, on the one hand, you think, well, yeah, they're wearing black dresses, Laura. That seems really common. And then they have these huge, tremendous, white lace collars and cuffs. And you can see they're both wearing that style. And the mother, of course, Elizabeth Maud, goes all the way. She, and has the hat and the veil, which probably is one of those things that you can pull up over if you're going into a sacred space. You could pull a piece of veil in front of your face, but then you could also pull it back when you need to see something or connect without the veil blocking your sight. And for her photograph, I've never seen Jenny in a hat, so that was interesting to me. But Jenny does wear something on her head, which is very Jenny Jerome and nobody else. She wears her hair in what is called I don't know if I have this right. It's called a coronet style, CORONET, coronet style. And she has this tremendous, beautiful long hair, and she braids them and then she wraps them around her head, like almost like a halo or something of flowers. And this style of hair, I will show you a picture, she will wear until the end of her life, right? And I don't see it really in photographs. No, we do see it in the library photograph. If we go back to that library photograph, she wears it as an adult. So maybe it becomes like her adult hairstyle that she just never lets go of. Go ahead, Heather.
Also notice in Maud's photo, on the lace collar, she's wearing the gold star.
So I was gonna, we were just gonna say that. Is that the medal on the ribbon?
Yes.
Because she also seems to have like a brooch holding together. So this piece of lace, right, can be taken off and used on other dresses, other garments, and then you put it on your shoulder and you hold it with a brooch of some sort. I think, like, this is me kind of, figuring this out. And then the medal, as you said, I would love to know more about that, because I really haven't done any research on what that means. So is that like, was that in death? Was that for service? Did she get it from, him? Was she awarded it? Does New Haven give it to her? I don't know any of those answers.
I think, I don't know this for sure, but I think this was given by the government for women who had lost their sons.
So she had a year, so there certainly could have, that action seems very likely to have happened. A year is plenty of time for the registration, for the government, the bureaucracy to kind of identify her as the person to get this medal. I don't think we'll have to keep our eye on it, but it must be super sacred because I don't think we see her wearing it anywhere else. But I think we should keep our eyes open and see if it pops up in some of the other photos. Yeah.
I know the medal was given during the pilgrimages. I am curious, though, if there was an earlier iteration of it. Because again, this is 1919, so it would be interesting to find out the origin of the medal.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Like I did a very superficial search at one point and did not turn up anything, but I haven't gone deep enough, because it is important. But also, your viewers should know that I think it's also really the connecting piece to Gilbert here is that one of his ways of keeping them close, keeping these women close, is that he collected lace when he was serving in Europe and he sent it back to them. Now, I don't think he collected these giant pieces of collar or cuff, although maybe, anything is possible unless we know otherwise, really. But at least in his diaries, I'm going to say there's probably at least 3 different times where he says something about, oh, I heard about Belgian lace makers and I'm going to go see them, kind of thing. So I think if we look at the next image on the screen, I think it could be a combination of things happening here. One, clearly it is a very common thing for a mother of a soldier to wear black with lace. Probably we need a fashion historian to give us the real details on this. But this is a piece of sheet music that I just came across in Yale's archival collections. And of course, it immediately made me think of the Jeromes. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's not just two unusual women in New Haven. It's popular music is the social media of the day, right? It's got these beautiful drawings in color. The music is everywhere. You can you go to concerts everywhere. You hear live music. It's what they do. So that picture made me think, okay, what they're doing is not unusual. And then the pictures on the right hand side um, of New Haven, this is a picture, and I see that I haven't labeled it, but this is the Reverend John Davenport, one of the founders of New Haven, one of the men who put the 9 Square Plan into New Haven. There he is wearing his Puritan outfit. And it's what we always think about, right? Historians nowadays like to argue. They say, Puritans didn't only wear black, Puritans wore color too. And although that's true, this is also true. This picture is in Yale University Art Gallery collection as as an icon. So it's not unusual to wear this kind of outfit. And then Christian theology, I'm writing Mother Mary giving up her only son, like this woman is doing. Here's my son, America, here's my boy, take him and go. And Elizabeth Maud Jerome basically said that too. So that is kind of our beginning story about their pilgrimage. And now we can look at a couple photos. So what we have on the screen, I'm going to show you some of the really just evocative, warm, I love seeing people, moving about these spaces. The Jerome family pilgrimage was a pilgrimage to retrace the steps. And I think there's nothing too uncommon about that. Americans wanted to see the things that their sons saw. But, in the case of the Jeromes, they needed to find his grave because it had not yet been moved. It was in the original location where he fell in a small town in northeastern France called Blamont. And you can see Elizabeth Maud in the upper left, and she is wearing the whole pilgrimage outfit right here. She's probably wearing the medal too. She's got the hat, the veil, the black dress, and the collar and the cuffs. And they go to the fields where he fell, where his biplane was shot down. They go to see, of course, the chapel, because they are certainly heavily practicing Christians. And they especially want to meet the woman. Her name is Madame Reynard, the French villager. And you see her in this photograph on the right. She is the first person to see Gilbert's plane coming down out of the sky, and she selflessly runs to it. And the story goes that she actually pulls his body from the plane. And so for them to meet with this other mother who cared for his body was the most important thing. And seeing the gravesite and the 3 crosses, which become, in Jenny's words, the 3 rude crosses in her poetry about this site visit to the first gravesite. And the beautiful piece of ribbon that has stayed in place with the pin, the straight pin, which we don't see anymore. Those 3 crosses, I love them for the layering of information, because it's kind of an American cross layered in between French crosses. And one of the crosses actually still survives and is in Connecticut and is owned by the Boy Scouts. So it's pretty nice things. His body doesn't stay in Blamont because during 1919, a big American military cemetery is opened in the Argonne, and that is the closest to him. And I don't know the story. Did they give permission willingly? Did the military say we're moving him? They didn't document it in photos, the actual move of the body. But the next thing we see in the scrapbook are these photos of Jenny and her mother. And you can see, like, Elizabeth Maud is no longer wearing her full-on pilgrimage outfit. The hat's gone. It doesn't look like she's wearing the collar. Maybe it is under that coat. Jenny's still wearing her pilgrimage outfit and her coronet hairstyle. But the white cross is here, the American military cross, the wooden cross, before the marble is created. And it just is a very, very different kind of sense and landscape. I see the laurel wreath at the foot, and double American flags. And they're not terribly happy with this scenario, but they're there at the beginning, so it's a stark landscape. Maybe they would have different feelings if they went during the Gold Star Mothers when greenery was there. But anyway, Elizabeth Maud Jerome, she's a New Englander. She's not going to be satisfied until she's satisfied. And what she says is, he's coming home. And so the last part of the pilgrimage is bringing Gilbert's body back to New Haven, which you can see is 1921 now. So it's a few years later, and they have the whole service with veterans and with Boy Scouts. And his body rests in the family living room, and then it's taken by caisson to the very close cemetery, Evergreen Cemetery in New Haven. And you can see that Elizabeth Maud has written "The End of the Journey" at the top of one of these photos, and he's in the Gilbert family plot, and they now are all as well. This is Elizabeth Maud. Her tombstone is she's the middle one. Gilbert is to the right of her, standing stone cross. An uncle served in the Civil War is to his right, and Jenny Jerome is behind her mother, actually, which probably says something about that relationship as well. But anyway, so their story ends, and just on a note here about Jenny not changing her lifestyle. Like this is the 1940s into the 1950s. And you can see people in New Haveners in bobby socks, these students from New Haven High School, and they're getting a lesson in how to use the card catalog from the librarian, Jenny Jerome. And you can see Jenny wearing her black and her lace and her coronet hairstyle right up until basically her death, which is actually not until the 1970s. So,
yeah, they got frozen in time.
Yes,
didn't they? I also the photo of the casket lying in the family's parlor
yep.
or living room,
Yep.
and the caption that says, "This is it, the or her sacrifice?"
Great question. I think it's the sacrifice, but I can see where you're thinking that, and I think we should probably look to see what her T's and H's look like in other places.
I think it is the, because in the captions on the photos at the cemetery, it looks like that it's the same.
Well, so I think that the I think that the script here, look at this, look at the last page, Heather, with the end. Yeah. That's Elizabeth Maud's handwriting. The printing is Jenny Jerome's handwriting. Yeah. But you can see the word "the" twice on the last page with,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep. And so you said that's Elizabeth Maud's handwriting?
The script is, yeah.
Yeah. So she's offering this narrative, the sacrifice, with her in the photo. Is there any uh evidence that this pilgrimage was mirroring that of the Roosevelts pilgrimage?
Well, I don't, the thing about the Jeromes is that it's hard to know how much they really look outside themselves, and that's really not a nice, really, that's a very limiting thing for me to say about them because I don't know. I only know what I know from the archives, from the material left behind, which is nothing compared to what their lives were. But they never suggest that they are thinking about what other people are doing. They don't, honestly, they really don't seem to care. Elizabeth Maud, anyway, the mother, she just is an extremely directed. I want this. I want this. I'm going to have this kind of. That's how she comes across in the writing of her children. But the fact is, I don't have access. I don't have a diary from Elizabeth Maud Jerome. So I don't know who she's looking at. Is she like, what are the newspapers? Like, that would probably be a really good thing for me to do. Read the newspapers coming into Hartford, Connecticut and New Haven, Connecticut. How are they talking about these couple of years as they get ready to go? Who gives her the idea in the first place? It's not Jenny saying, "Mom, let's go do this." She comes up with it somehow.
It was. I'm also thinking about the pilgrimage of Joyce Kilmer's parents, who went to France. They went several times, but I think the first time they went was either 1919 or 1920, and what they write about is very similar to what I'm seeing in these photos. And so there's some awareness, one, that this is important to mourning practices, but how it's described also seems fairly uniform. But these two families and with other families that went as well. I mean, the families that are going on these pilgrimages are those with the financial means to do so. This is not an inexpensive endeavor.
I totally agree with you. They had enough money to go, and there was no worrying about, finances on the journey. There's nothing written about that. But at the same time, they went once. They never went to Europe again. They never went to Europe before. They never went to Europe after. This was it. They lived in this really very nice, solid, upper middle class house. And that's what they did.
Do you have a sense who took the photographs?
Well, I do think that it's likely Jenny had a camera. And actually, I thought about that the other day when I was prepping this. I'm pretty sure she does have a small camera. But I also know it's a bit opaque, but there are a couple of instances in her journal where she writes that American military soldiers, men, have come to see them, come to talk to them. Honestly, I think Elizabeth Maud is demanding things, and they're kind of there to be like the relay between, the field office and what this mother, wants. So one time I know that they were taken around in a car driven by some American military men. So maybe they also took some photographs. They did have, some conversations with the folks in Blamont. Somebody was there helping to facilitate because their French was bad. Jenny writes about, her school book French was not cutting it, and her mother didn't speak it at all and didn't care to. So they did have kind of little people, not little, you know what I mean, but people along the way, kind of helping out. When they were in Paris, they were accidentally kind of meeting up with other Americans. Oh, what are you here for? Oh, I'm here to look for my son. So there's people around.
Yeah, it was an interesting time, and there were so many Americans that were living in Paris before the war, and then so many that stayed after. So it was a very vibrant time in terms of an American expat community living in France that probably all pilgrims were encountering at some level and seeking out other people who spoke English or who could offer some type of assistance.
Yeah, I mean, I love that, the idea of all this mix, this great mix of people, in the middle of that. It's so, it makes you think, wow, what can come out of that? What kind of literature comes out? What kind of painting comes out of that mix? But again, they're not, they're very awkward, socially awkward people, really. That's what it comes, the women anyway. That's what it comes down to. So Jenny writes about them going back to their hotel room and eating crackers in bed because they have upset stomachs. They're just not comfortable. I think, Jenny is so desperate to get back home and to routine. That's what she's about. Like, get me back to my job. That's where I want to be. She doesn't need all this other stuff. So,
These photo the scrapbooks are incredible. We heard from another colleague at the conference that we both attended that forms the basis of this volume about a French couple who went on their honeymoon. They took a battlefield pilgrimage, and being able to peer into these pilgrimages through the photos, it's incredible, and even more so with the captions that accompany the photos.
it is I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, the fact is that that status that they do have that you mentioned, you know, that's what documenting things is what Victorians did. I mean, that's their strength, right? Is documenting all the bits and pieces of their upper middle class life, and so they just transferred that to to the pilgrimage. But they have a very rich, photographic history of the kids, and of being a Boy Scout. And I mean, what other Boy Scout do we think from Connecticut could we find like his introductory photo and all this, the detail. They they they're not really interested in, like, they don't document the city. They don't take pictures of trolleys which are going right by the house. They don't take pictures of markets or any of that urban life. They take pictures of themselves and of their green landscape. So they're just very much of that class and heritage, I would say, New England kind of heritage.
You mentioned that you may be doing some additional research with this family. What directions will you head in with it?
Well, it's actually, even though research is still important, it's not about writing a nonfiction, kind of biography of the family or something along the, or a thematic, kind of World War I study or something like that. It's really for me about how to give voice to Jenny, maybe, who is kind of the least paid attention to here. And I think she's pretty fascinating character. Um, there's probably a lot to say emotionally about her, and will be so curious if you do one of your psychological readings, a smaller piece of that, because there's probably a lot to say about her and about the mother. But I'm using history now to write historical fiction. And I do not read historical fiction, so I can't really tell you, what that is really like. But um, because they documented so much, it's natural to recreate scenes, right? And it's getting more natural for me to recreate language. Um, you know, at first, I was like, I'm never going to write dialogue that someone didn't speak. I'm not going to do that. I'm trained in history. I don't do that. Time marches on, and I've gone in this other place, so I'm hoping to actually give it some life in that way. Yeah.
When you found this scrapbook, had you thought about the pilgrimages that Gold Star mothers or family members had taken to the Western Front, or this really kind of was the impetus for looking into the pilgrimages overall?
Yeah. So I didn't know anything about World War One, and then it became like World War One is basically like the most interesting thing that we have around. I'm not a Civil War person. World War Two is kind of like overdone. World War One is the moment where the past and the 20th century meet. And I just don't think it could be any more interesting because of that. And because I spent more time in school with 19th century architecture and art. So it was a natural kind of fit for me because it's, kind of this fulcrum, right? And that the drums fit more easily with the 19th century than they did with the 20th. But I didn't know anything. I still don't know anything, Heather. It's just amazing how much, there is to do. And I just feel like with the research and writing, you can just do the best you can do. Time is running out. At least that's how I feel it for me. I don't have like, I've got more decades behind me than I have in front of me, and I've got a lot of projects. and this is like this is an important one.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and to see all the people who get pulled into World War One who aren't necessarily interested in military history or battles or kind of the technical pieces, but are more interested in the narratives and people and the context and local areas and that tie to the war. So there is something interesting, unique, I think, about World War One. I don't come from a military history background either, and now I can't get away from it. And so there is like this vortex or some type of magnetic pole that once people encounter an element that is interesting about the war or the context, it's hard to get away from it.
Absolutely. I mean, they're fascinating people, and it's the thing about like when I did the little World War One book, I used a collection of newspaper clippings at the New Haven Public Library, which I did not know at the time. Jenny was the librarian and very well could have made those clipping folders. And I suspect actually she had a hand in it. You saw the picture of the scissors. That was her thing. She was the clippings woman. Clippings folders were the, Google image of the day. When people needed images and clippings, they went to the library, and the librarian had to produce them. So I didn't know any of this. And if you keep digging, you will find the connections always, right? But mm, I don't know. I'm just grateful to be in amongst. I mean, the scholarship goes forward, and that benefits my kind of work because I'm not going to be doing all these other things that people are doing. But yet, it's going to inform a more truthful story. Even though I believe, in the end, we're only getting a taste of what their lives were like. You know, we don't really know.
No, we don't. And yet we can provide some small piece of color to the lives. Um, Thank you so much for taking time today to talk about the chapter and to talk about the Jerome family and your interest in art history and all of the ways that you are integrating all of this. I think it's really beautiful. So I appreciate the fact that we have met over the past couple of years and have had a chance to get to know one another. And I'm looking forward to where maybe a new dimension of this the Jerome story goes, but also how you are bringing the characters now to life in your writings.
Thank you, Heather. Love to be here. See you soon.